Hi guys, so in my last video I showed you real quick how I distressed my board, and now I'm going to show you how to get your stencil centered and lined up on your board. This is an 18-inch round. It's actually just under 17.5 inches from edge to edge. So in my software I made a circle that was exactly the size, and then I fit my stencil inside of it, just sliced it with my knife tool, and then cut it. So you can see what I have weeded out here is the stencil as it is. But in order to get it placed on here perfectly center, when I add that outer circle that matches the diameter of my board, when I go to weed it, it leaves me with that outline that I can use to then line it up on my board. So what I'm going to do is attach my application tape here. Move this out of the way. And I'm using a temporary vinyl. This is Enduramat from Sign Warehouse. You could use 631, you could use 813, you could use whatever you wanted. But I'm using this temporary here. Actually, this might be this is Orcal 631. Okay. A lot of my indoor vinyl is Enduramat. Okay, so I'm just going to place this down. Cut it off. The next piece, and this is the Enduramask Perfect Tear paper transfer tape, application tape, and it is my favorite to use for just about everything, except when I need a clear. I've been through many rolls of this. I love it. Put this one down. It comes on a big roll. I get 100 yards at a time. Okay, so then we're going to make sure that our app tape is adhered really well. And what I'm going to do is just cut around this outer ring. It doesn't have to be perfect because that's not a paint line, just to help us line it up. Just gonna go around here. Cut that off. And then I'm going to cut along this line, and this one does need to be more exact. In fact, I'm going to go cut this one on my guillotine, and I will be right back. Okay, so I have a guillotine cutter that just allows me to get that perfectly straight edge there. And then again, make sure it's adhered really well. Cut around this outer edge. Again, it does not have to be perfect. It's just there to help us line it up. Again, I don't have to cut this edge perfect. I'm going to put this one down first, but I do want to trim it down a little bit. Okay, so now we have that. Let's bring our board, and I just use these little rubber triangles to keep it from sliding around on my table. Again, we just want to make sure that this is on here really good. Okay. And I'm going to grab some painter's tape. You could use painter's tape, you could use app tape or transfer tape. Figure out where I want the top to be. You could even use a strip of transfer tape. And I'm going to get a piece, kind of lay it a little off center here, and then I'm going to line up my stencil with the edge of my board here. There we go. And then tape this down. Again, make sure your app tape is really good on your stencil. This is called the hinge method. I'm going to pull this back. And cut this off. And I'm going to save that because I'll use that for my paint later. And then you just want to take your scraper and scrape it down. You don't want to just lay the whole thing down flat because you can get bubbles or wrinkles. This just allows it to go down nice and smooth. Put that on there. Okay, and I'm going to peel this off. And I'm going to hold on to it because I'm going to reuse it for the bottom one. And then again, just pull this back a little bit with your scraper. And apply. There we go. So just make sure it's on the board really well. And then grab your app tape. And don't pull it straight up to remove it. So I fold it all the way back against the board. And then just pull. And it'll come right off. Just like that. Okay, so now for the bottom half. Grab it, and again, I'm going to get my painter's tape here. Have that ready to place. And then I'm just going to line it up. So again, we want to make sure we're lined up with the top half, as well as lined up along the bottom. And we are. Once you've got it lined up, just push that down. And make sure that your app tape is good and stuck on there. And then it's a little harder to start when you don't have overhang, but I'm just going to pull that back, cut it off, and again, grab your scraper, and then I'm going to save this. I'll show you what I'm going to use that for in a minute. Make sure it's on there really well. Again, it can be a little hard to get started because there's not an overhang. But once you do, and again, don't pull straight up, fold it back, and just pull. And then you can see that there's a little bit of kind of a gap here. And so what I'm going to do is take my painter's tape, and I kind of work in small sections. Just want to make sure that we're covering that gap. And if it's hard to get it exact, you can get it on there and then just trim it with an X-Acto knife or utility knife or whatever. Okay, so again, that's not necessary if you've got a good steady hand or if you had a wider area. I just want to make sure that I can work without stressing about getting my paint in the wrong place. I'm just going to go through. I'll sometimes take my backing just to protect it and go back over it again just to make sure that nice and adhered. But this board has been sanded to 220. Okay, so we are ready. And I am just, the back is painted with just regular interior house paint. I did a gray and then an off-white over that called Elegant White. And then I'm going to paint in more house paint. This is the Behr Premium Plus. Got graphic charcoal and Indian Sunset that I'm going to use to paint this. And it comes in white jars with branding labels. I put them in the clear so I can see them. But this is just regular house paint. These samples cost me $1 each during the sale at Home Depot. And I'm using makeup sponges. These are just cheap makeup sponges. Because my areas are small, I'm going to use the smaller ones. But these are washable. You can see, I mean, I've used this one quite a few times and washed it. Let me get us in the center here. Make sure my triangles are good. Okay, so let's start with the charcoal. Shake it up. And I'm just going to work right off of this backing for this app tape, or for the vinyl. And I've got my sponge, and I'm never going to go straight from the paint to the sign, because if you can smush it and paint comes out of it, if you smush it on your board, paint's going to come out, and that's what's going to get it up under the stencil. And so the first coat's pretty light. Kind of starting out, you feel like, oh, this is going to take forever. But it really doesn't. I'm just going to go around and just up and down. You don't have to push hard. And because I'm doing the dots in the coral color, I'm making sure I don't get it there. We're just going to go around and do this outer ring. Alright, so that went pretty quick. And again, I'm going to do the dots in a different color. So we're going to skip those. I'm going to go around again. So you really want to do thin coats. If you were to do 1 or 2 thicker coats, it's actually going to take longer to dry than it would to do 3 thinner coats and wait for them to dry. This outer ring's almost dry already. So it really does not take that long at all. So our first coat of the charcoal is down, and it looks to me the outside's almost dry. You want to let it to dry all the way. If you try to go in with your next layer and it's not quite all the way dry, it will pull up paint, and we don't want that to happen. So I'm going to go ahead and start on my coral. And another little sponge, and I'm going to use the small tip for this one because I got to get in between these strips of charcoal. Some paints like to, when you use a wet brush, and you can get these sponges wet, You can use makeup sponges, you can use stenciling sponges, you can use makeup brushes, paint brushes, I mean, whatever you want. If you can make it work with a toothbrush, there's no one way to do this. It's just whatever works for you. I like to see what a bunch of people's techniques are and adapt it for what works for me. So I hope, at least by watching my videos, it helps you figure out what works for you. Because everything I do might not work. You might think that you have an easier way or a better way, and I think that's great. By all means, do what works best for you. And I'm going to drop links for everything that I'm using in the description. So for where I get everything that I'm using, I can't remember the name of the script font. The typewriter font, I believe, is called Typewriter. I think it came in a duo with Heavenfield. I'll look and I'll make sure I put links for those. But we're just going through, and again, this first coat is going to be a very light coat. Just kind of want to get the color on there, and kind of seals the edges of the stencil, so to speak. Doesn't mean the next coat that you can go in there with a real heavy coat and it's not going to bleed at all. It just helps. So there's our first layer with the coral. I kind of want to get this a little more even here. You really want your paint to be even so that it all dries evenly. Okay, so now all of our coral, or our charcoal, is dried by now. So we can go in and add our second coat. Sometimes you can get away with just 2, but it usually takes 3. Again, if your first coat had been thicker, it wouldn't be dry by now. And I am using a flat paint, so it does dry faster than a gloss paint. I've always had better luck with flat and matte. They don't seem to peel up the paint when you remove your stencil. And I use this over oil-based stains all the time. So yes, you can use water-based over oil-based. You just want to make sure that that oil base has had adequate time to dry. It's generally about 24 to 48 hours. Sometimes longer if it's really humid where you are. So a trick is you've got to be resolved that, okay, this is going to take 3 coats. Because you can see as I'm doing this, I think to myself, okay, well, if I just did this second coat a little bit thicker, I don't have to do a 3rd coat. But I do risk bleeding. It will take longer to dry. And it's just not worth it. So you're just gonna have to say, okay, this is 3 coats. I'm just gonna have to let it be almost completely filled and deal with it. It's very tempting to just say, oh, I'll just add a little bit more. So one thing I love about these sponges is in these areas where it's larger and I don't have to avoid obstacles, I can use the side of the sponge and cover a larger area at once. But when I need to get in somewhere, I can use the point. So these are great. Again, they do wash. If this is indoor house paint, it washes up with water, a little soap if you need to add to it. Alright, so there's 2 coats, and our charcoal around the edge is not quite dry. And again, if you start adding more paint, especially with a sponge, and it's almost dry and not quite dry, you're actually going to pull up some of that paint. So I'm going to let it dry for just a minute. We are 34 minutes in total from when I hit record, and that was adding the application tape and talking and all of that. So it's really not taking that long, considering that This is a 17.5-inch round. But I'm gonna let this dry for a few minutes and we'll come back and add our third coat and remove our stencil. Okay, so about 5-minute break, came back, everything looks like it's about dry. So I'm just going to come in here with our third coat. And this one can be a little thicker. Still don't glob it on. We're just going to go around, add this third layer, and then we can take off our stencil. Okay, so we've got our third coat of the charcoal down, and that looks good. Kind of go in and look and see if there's any spots. I'm gonna let that dry while I do the coral, and then we can kind of spot check it again. Whoops. Baby wipes fix everything. Okay. I'm just coming in here on these spots. Now this file, so the frame, the rings, and kind of the style are a file that I got in a bundle on Font Bundles. I don't think the bundle is available anymore. I'll look and see if I can find the exact file. And it said something about a farmer's market on the inside. I love the style of it, but farmer's market isn't really my family's decor and style, and so I took the words out and added my own inside. And again, I'll link the fonts. So this is kind of a mismatch of my own and using something else that I had purchased. Okay, so I think that's pretty good. Again, I can wash these sponges, so this will get reused. Just gonna kind of go in and make sure there's no little spots that got overlooked. And this is a distressed kind of vintage looking sign, so if it's not perfect, it's not going to ruin the look. But so somehow my video was not recording when I did my third coat. I did it exactly the same as I did the other ones. I'm glad I caught it before I removed the stencil. But again, I did exactly the same, just did that third coat of paint, and that's it. Maybe took 7 or 8 minutes, and I just removed the blue painter's tape around the outside, and I'm getting ready to remove the stencil. So I'm not waiting for it to completely dry. A lot of it is already dry just because it's matte paint, but again, I'm using the Behr Premium Plus graphic charcoal and Indian Sunset, and again, I just put these in my own jars. They come in a Behr paint jar. And now I'm going to start removing the stencil. And you can see, nice crisp line so far. So if you notice where possible, I always pull against the grain because you can pull up little slivers of wood if you pull with the grain. Pulling against the grain helps prevent that. Okay, so we have weeded our sign, and if you look closely, there's one or two little spots, but hardly noticeable. If I needed to fix it, I could. Just go in with a little fine brush. But overall, I think it looks really good. And I'm going to put a Lazy Susan base on the bottom and use that on my kitchen table. But that's it. That's all there is to it. Oh, I did not weed it all. Forgot I had the little bits around here. So let's see what the final finished product looks like. Forgotten all about these little pieces. Okay, so now there's our true finished sign. Because I'm putting it in the kitchen and I do intend on using it as a Lazy Susan, I am going to protect it. Probably because it's indoors, I'll use aerosol polyacrylic. I may use a polyurethane. I haven't decided. I'll decide when I get downstairs. But there we go. What do you think? And again, I'll have links for everything down in the bottom. So make sure you check the description out. Everything will be there. And again, if you have any questions, just let me know. Thanks.